Bueno, este video va a ser bastante largo, voy a estar reaccionando a un video que se llama La historia completa de Dota 2, así que pues, me interesa saber qué pasó desde que yo me fui en más o menos 2014-2015 hasta la actualidad, así que estuve viendo varios videos sobre un canal, en un canal que explica la historia de varios héroes. Entonces bueno, me topé con este video que era el último del canal y me interesó bastante. Vi 10 minutos nada más, así que vamos a verlo juntos. No voy a hacer esto muy largo porque el video es larguísimo, así que vamos a ver.
Dota 2 is a wonderful
Ahí
game.
arranca.
Over the past year and a half, editor Tusky and I have been burning
Es
ourselves
largo,
out to document the history of that wonderful game. History that was already being forgotten. Our goal was to create a repository that all of us could look back upon to remember. And by now, we believe this channel hosts enough information that if an attentive viewer watches each of the videos, they'll gain a thorough understanding of what Dota was. But still, we haven't covered everything, and we won't. This is the last Stories of Dota video. And unlike our other videos, today we're not going to discuss a specific hero. Instead, we're going to dive into the history of the game itself and deconstruct the changes that Dota 2 went through, the teams and heroes that defined it, and how all of this impacted our most important tournaments, the International. This will also be a bit more of a personal video. I hope that's okay. So, what was the story of Dota 2? This video is sponsored by boot.dev. Boot.dev is a fantastic platform for learning how to code.
Bueno, el video obviamente está en inglés y no tiene subtítulos. Después me olvidé de aclararlo al principio porque no tiene subtítulos, así que lo tenemos que ver en inglés. Es la única idea. Espero que se escuche bien también porque si no cagamos.
Boot.dev resembles an RPG that teaches you how to code by coding. For this, they care a lot about getting you practical experience, as the only real way to learn programming is to actually program. The end goal is not just to teach you programming, but to get you fully prepared to work professionally as a programmer, which is frequently a very
Estoy dejando el video sin edición, obviamente, ¿no?
And on your way there, you can make some silly Dota 2 custom games, which we can then play together on my other channel. But the best part of boot.dev is that if you're still skeptical, you can just have a look at everything ahead of time, no questions asked. Boot.dev is incredibly transparent, as all of their content is free to preview without a membership, and memberships can easily be cancelled and refunded within 30 days. They are confident in their product and customer friendly. Go check out boot.dev. Their link is in the description of this video, and if you use the promo code Stories of Dota, you can get 25% off either a monthly or even an annual subscription. Again, the link is in the description, and the promo code for 25% off is Stories of Dota. Thank you very much to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. As I'm sure most of you already know, Dota 2 is a continuation of the Warcraft 3 mod, Defense of the Ancients, All-Stars. From my personal recollection, Dota 2 came at a needed time. Our story begins when Warcraft 3 had been out for around 6 years, and was starting to feel old. Back then, game development was still significantly limited by hardware.
Estos ítems básicamente, estos son el right band, este es el ítem y este es un tango, así que todavía me acuerdo de esas cosas. La patita acá abajo significa que es un héroe de agilidad. Acá la armadura, el daño, no sé, varias cosas que me acuerdo. Acá el skill para subir los skills y acá los skills distintos, 4 skills.
Which was progressing rapidly. Games were aging quickly because newer ones included features and visuals that hadn't been possible up to that point. Warcraft 3 was still solid, but there was also a definite desire for something newer. For many of us, Heroes of Newerth, which went into beta in April 2009, filled that initial void of a more modern Dota.
También lo probé.
That game was plagued by a multitude of questionable decisions. A couple months later, League of Legends came around, and while it certainly attracted a large audience, League wasn't Dota. This isn't meant as...
El LoL inicial no era Dota, obviamente, pero después se fue bifurcando bastante hasta generar un juego bastante distinto. Pero el primer League, yo jugué la beta y era un desastre en 2009. No era muy bueno. Después se fue refinando y fue terminando en un juego muy bueno, pero bueno, eso.
criticism. But League was and is a very different game from Dota. For some, that was great. But for many players like me, it wasn't what we were looking for. We wanted Dota, but not limited by the Warcraft 3 engine. And then, in 2010, Valve announced Dota 2. Dota 2 was different from all the other Dota clones because it wasn't a fundamentally new game. Instead, Valve promised a standalone version of the original Dota All-Stars, made in cooperation with its developer, IceFrog. And Valve even went another huge step further. On the 1st of August 2011, Valve announced that not only would they show the game for the first time at the Gamescom 2 weeks later, but also that they would host a tournament there. The first international.
Bueno, acá pausa un segundo. O sea, lo que tienen que entender básicamente es que los juegos que salieron, los clones, digamos, que eran el LoL y el HON, eran bastante truchos. O sea, los héroes o campeones eran muy basura, o sea, están mal diseñados. Obviamente los juegos estaban llenos de bugs, pero lo más importante eran los problemas de balance. El Dota ya estaba bastante refinado. O sea, tenía más de 100 héroes y estaba todo muy bien balanceado. O sea, había torneos ya y todo eso. En cambio, en el LoL tenías 40 campeones y eran todos una basura, eran todos un copy-paste, que eran todos muy, muy simplistas. El Home copió mucho del Dota, pero igual había problemas. Por ejemplo, me acuerdo que le habían implementado un cooldown que después se metió en el Dota, que es el cooldown al bash. Entonces no se podía meter 2 o 3 bash seguidos. Y eso para mí era uno de los cambios de balance que primero implementaron que no me gustó para nada. Pero bueno, nada, quería recalcar eso que es muy importante, ¿no? O sea, el Dota ya estaba muy bien hecho y las copias eran una basura, básicamente, hasta ese momento, ¿no? 2009, 2010.
Where the winning team earned an unimaginable prize pool.
El International no es que movió tanta gente, ¿no?
StarCraft 2 was the biggest
Excepto a la gente que le
game at the time,
interesaba
and its
el
largest
ámbito
prize pool of
competitivo.
the year was a meager $93,000 at the GSL Super Tournament.
O sea, no es que la
The
gente
prize pool
salió
of the
adelante y dijo,
International
¡ah,
was
el mejor
so much
torneo del
higher than
planeta! No,
anything we had ever
estos son
seen in esports
casters.
before it.
Eh,
That I
gente
remember,
que
some people
estaba en la
genuinely
movida de
not
ver
believing it.
profesionales ya
They
jugar.
just thought it was some sort of elaborate prank. But it wasn't. The prize pool was real, the international was happening, and the 16 best Dota teams had been invited to play. But despite all of the bravado, the actual location and setup of the event was fairly modest.
Y acá lo que digo, o sea, era modesto porque a la mayoría de la gente no le interesaba este tipo de cosas. O sea, no es que o sea, hoy en día tenés el Battle Pass, tenés distintas cosas que las empresas lo usan para promocionar sus mundiales, pero en ese momento como que a la mayoría de la gente le resbalaba, querían el Dota 2 y ya, o sea, la verdad que el International chupaba un huevo porque ¿qué te va a dar? O sea, la gente quería ver el showcase del Dota 2, que era básicamente el International. Nada más que eso, ¿no? No era la gran cosa el torneo en sí, porque al día de hoy muchísima gente todavía no ve los mundiales de los distintos juegos, así que en esa época menos todavía, para que se den una idea.
It was a mid-sized booth, tucked away in one of the less popular halls with limited audience seating, and Valve offered bypassers t-shirts to come watch the games, as interest was tepid. But as the tournament progressed, the audience started finding itself, because two things became increasingly obvious. Everybody loved Na'Vi, and this Dota 2 game was pretty cool. The first international was an invite-only tournament. There was no way to qualify for it. Instead, Valve handpicked 16 teams to compete. However, they also only gave them access to the game a couple of weeks before the event.
Ahí pueden fijarse abajo cómo están los skills del sniper, son placeholders, están hechos en Paint, eso me acuerdo todavía. O sea, estaba tan trucho el juego hasta ese momento que no tenían ni siquiera contratados los artistas para poder hacer los skills de las habilidades, digamos. O sea, ni hablar de la interfaz, era un desastre. En cambio, uno viene acostumbrado del Dota 1, pasó hacia el Dota 2, que está todo lleno de lag, hecho mierda. ¿Cómo se llama? Los gráficos ni siquiera eran mejores, o sea, en este video se ven mejores, pero esto es sobre las etapas finales. Pero era un desastre el juego cuando salió. Yo me acuerdo porque lo jugué y dije, no, esto no lo vuelvo a tocar hasta que avance mucho la dirección del proyecto. Pero bueno, ahora pueden ver, miren.
Dota 2 was still very much incomplete, feeling sluggish and being plagued with disconnection issues.
Claro,
According to
sluggish.
Davey, who played for Na'Vi, they found it very difficult to find other teams to practice against, as most of them continued playing Warcraft 3 Dota instead.
Y claro, nadie
These
quería jugar al
technical
Dota
issues
2.
persisted during the tournament, as many games had players complaining about lag or experiencing disconnects. They also visibly lacked practice, as Dota 2 wasn't the same as Warcraft 3 Dota.
No, no es que faltaba práctica, es que las mecánicas eran distintas. O sea, hay muchas mecánicas en Dota 2 que no están en Dota 1. Eh, no sé, el March of Machines del Tinker, por ejemplo, por tirar un skill cualquiera, se movía a 500 de velocidad en el Dota 2, cuando el intended, o sea, el objetivo, era de 400 en el Dota 1. Eso hizo que el Tinker, por ejemplo, cuando saliera, fuera infinitamente más fuerte que en el Dota 1. Y el Tinker se volvió meta automáticamente. Después sacaron un parche en el cual lo tuvieron que nerfear, obviamente de forma invisible, como un bug fix. Y bueno, con parches como ese hubo un trillón, había como un parche por semana, yo me acuerdo de haber posteado en un foro, un parche por semana con 100 cambios grandes, y eso ya después del International.
Just yet, because
No.
at the time, Dota 2 had ported less than half of the heroes.
Tenía pocos
This
héroes,
resulted
pero
in
no
a
importaba
metagame
eso.
that was unique to the first International, a metagame dominated by the few heroes with strong disables that were already implemented. Earthshaker, Windranger, Vengeful Spirit, Beastmaster, and Tidehunter. Stuns were incredibly valuable because they were the best way to protect your carry. During this era of Dota, there were only very limited resources available on the map, and the teams hadn't figured out yet how to optimize their economies. A very
Mentira eso.
defensive single carry style was dominant, where both teams interacted little and focused primarily on farming, usually in a tri-lane. But there was another reason for this. Mana was incredibly scarce. Ring of
Eso es verdad.
Aquila hadn't been added yet, and the slow farming meta didn't afford supports enough gold for arcane boots. The best most supports could do was an occasional mana potion.
Es que Arcane Boots, a ver, o sea, ya para cuando tenés Arcane Boots no deberías tener tanto problema de mana, ya tenés un nivel bastante elevado. Pero acá en el video pueden ver Pugna, por ejemplo, tiene 1,2 de regen de mana, es nivel 4 si no me equivoco. Entonces, es muy diferente al Dota de hoy, en el cual podés spamear, spamear. Probablemente Pugna tenga el doble de regen de mana hoy en día en nivel 4 que lo que tenía en ese momento. A ver, el maná, miren.
Many heroes didn't even scale
Esta
all
parte
of
ya la
their
vi.
abilities because using
Miren el
them
maná del
cost
Venomancer,
mana,
por
which they
ejemplo.
didn't have, and skilling stats instead at least
Tiró
gave
una Q,
some
se le fue más de la
benefit.
mitad del maná. Ahí
Since
está.
spells were so limited, a fairly common and good strategy was to tank up, using cost-effective items like Vanguard or Hood of Defiance, and then win fights by outlasting the
El Vanguard era
resources
muy
opponents
fuerte.
had access to.
Era mucho con clic
This
derecho.
set up a perfect storm for one of the most dominant hero performances of all time. The best hero at the International one, without question, was Anti-Mage. Anti-Mage was a powerful late-game carry that had high magic resistance and burned his opponent's mana whenever he attacked. With just a Vanguard, he became nearly unkillable, and a single
Sí, igual nadie sacaba Vanguard de primer ítem, se sacaba Battle Fury, pero había 4 carries en el International 1, que eran el Anti-Mage, el Morphling, la Spectre y el Void. Esos eran los únicos 4 carries que había. No es que el Anti-Mage era la gran cosa. Y que solo había 4 carries para elegir y el Anti-Mage era el mejor de todos. De hecho, en el Dota 1 se decía que el Anti-Mage era uno de los peores héroes del juego y justo antes del International se lo buffió. Entonces, eso también influyó bastante. Pero cuando tenés 4 carries para elegir, ¿no? Y que destaque uno no es la gran cosa. A ver, la draw era un carry de mid game y se jugaba más al late game en esa época, o sea, a power farmear que un héroe power farmear toda la jungla. Es por eso el anti-mage destacó, no es que sacaba Vanguard y era inmortal, eso no es tan cierto.
hit from him did drastic resource damage. Fights against Anti-Mage were a race against time, as he would eventually run any team
El
out of
blink era lo
mana
fuerte,
and then left them prey to his allies. He was
le
also one of the
permitía farmear más
fastest
rápido que
farmers
cualquier
around,
otro.
as his ability to blink was incredibly valuable on the old, restrictive Dota map. Anti-Mage was so overwhelmingly powerful that he was contested in 90% of the tournament and still had a 70% win rate. The best way to play against Anti-Mage was to ban him. A rule that Na'Vi stuck to
Ahí está
religiously,
Weaver.
banning him in every single game they played. I would like to tell you that the international one was a battleground of fierce competition, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Some matches were definitely exciting, but the overall winner was quite clear from very early on. Na'Vi stomped everybody they played against. Their style of Dota was often different from what I described earlier. They liked being aggressive, challenging their opponents during the laning stage to build momentum and then leverage that into fast pushes and quick victories. Much of this was enabled by Puppy, who loved using Chen and Enigma to support his team from the jungle. Mention should also be given to Havost, who was
Los
unusually
ganks de Papi
aggressive
eran
for a carry
impresionantes con
player,
Chen. Te
which forced
gankeaba a nivel
Na'Vi to
2 y
chase
no podías
after
hacer
him and
absolutamente
protect him.
nada porque te
Na'Vi
daba
were one
vuelta
of the few
por
teams
la
that used
torre, te
Blink
entraba por
Dagger,
atrás.
which was risky because at the time, Blink Dagger had a 75 mana cost, and mana was really valuable. But it worked because their faster pace made mana less of an issue. Their aggressive approach to the game was also helped by the structure of the tournament, which consisted mostly of best-of-1 matches, meaning teams weren't given a chance to adapt. And so, Na'Vi destroyed the competition, losing only a single game across the entire tournament. And only because they thought it would be funny if they picked Pudge, one of the worst heroes around, in the Grand Finals.
Eso es mentira, el Pudge se bufeó muchísimo desde el Dota 1 cuando lo portearon al Dota 2 porque se podía cancelar el ROT instantáneamente. En el Dota 1, si ustedes butean un mapa, van a darse cuenta que el ROT no se puede cancelar instantáneamente. O sea, ustedes no pueden hacer double tap, pueden hacer WWE, eso no lo pueden hacer. Tienen que hacer W, esperar W de vuelta para cancelar. No se puede cancelar instantáneamente, pues no te puede ayudar a la hitear. Y segundo, se puede cancelar la animación del hook. En el Dota 1 vos tirás el hook y ya está. O sea, apretaste la Q y ya está. Está jugado a la buena de Dios de que el hook pegue. Entonces la gente ni bien ve la animación del hook, ya saben en qué dirección va. En Dota 2 no se sabe muy bien la dirección en la cual va a ir el hook, porque el push hace como una animación medio rara, en vez de hacer como una línea recta como hacía en el Dota 1. Y bueno, nada, básicamente esos dos cambios hicieron que el push sea muy fuerte en el Dota 2. Que en el Dota 1 no era así.
It was funny, and they even almost managed to win that match as well.
Cualquiera que jugara en esa época
Na'Vi
se
were
daba
just
cuenta al
much
toque.
better than everybody else, and so they beat eHome and took home the first Aegis in style. Unfortunately, I can't recommend any games from TI1 for rewatch. This is mostly because of the awful production quality of that first tournament. The audio sounds like it was recorded in a jet engine. TI1 is a tournament that we should certainly cherish, as it kick-started our world of Dota 2. But I recommend we do so from a distance.
All I ever wanted was Dota 2 pizza. It's all I've ever wanted. The wait is killing me. I swear we are waiting, but oh fuck, why can't you see that all I ever wanted was my beta key?
Despite its many issues, the first international lit a fire in the Dota community. Everybody wanted to try the new game. Initially, most would find themselves disappointed, as Valve slow-rolled the release of beta keys. For what it's worth, as somebody who gained quick access to the game because I was at TI1, that slow release was justified. The initial version of Dota 2 was clunky and felt like you were always playing with significant delay. It was still very much an in-development game. But nonetheless, the demand was massive. And so, Valve slowly opened up the doors in a way that I think was pure genius. Dota 2 remained in a closed beta all the way up until its release a few years later. At first, the only way to get in was to fill out a Steam survey that asked about your hardware and experience with Warcraft 3 Dota, and then hope to receive a beta key. But as the game became more refined, Valve handed out additional keys to those who already had access to the game. Aspiring players quickly realized that the best way to get a Dota 2 beta key was to engage in the Dota community and request one from somebody who was already playing. Then, once somebody received their key, they also received additional ones from Valve to give away. Whole communities formed around gathering and sharing.
Yo tengo videos en los
beta
cuales
keys.
reparto
It was
keys de
very
Dota 2.
dynamic as it originated entirely from the player community. To get access to the game, you had to engage with its existing player base, which only made people want it even more. This system was incredibly successful. Around June 2012, Valve started selling an early access pass that included a beta key, and it was widely considered to be a waste of money because there were so many of them out there and the community was so dedicated to sharing them. By the time the International 2 came around, Dota 2 already averaged over 100,000 concurrent players.
Eso no
But
lo
let's not
sabía.
rush ahead. Another incredibly important thing happened during this time period. Valve implemented 44 new heroes. This completely changed how the game was played, as a vast new cast of characters became
Acá empecé a
available.
jugar yo más o
They
menos.
also added 5 new items: Abyssal Blade, Heaven's Halberd, Ring of Aquila, Rod of Athos, and Tranquil Boots. By far the most important out of this batch was Ring of Aquila.
Sí,
Ring of
te da mana
Aquila was a
regen.
cost-effective early game item that provided great stats and a helpful mana regeneration aura.
En aura.
From the moment of its implementation until its eventual removal, Ring of Aquila remained a cornerstone of the laning stage, as it enabled heroes to fight much earlier than they would otherwise have been able to. Like the first, the International 2 had a $1.6 million prize pool. But that's where the similarities ended. The International 2 was held in its own dedicated location in Seattle, with a proper stage, a range of casters and analysts, and an audience that came specifically for Dota 2. Its production set a new standard for what a Dota tournament could be. If you ever wondered why we never used TI1 audio, it's because it sounded like this.
Just ran out of it and got stunned once again. But he probably would have died anyway.
But TI2 was nice, modern, and professional.
Less rack, big semi-carry can possibly be played as a real carry if you go and play it like Yamate likes to do.
The International 2 was still mostly an invite.
Ahí en el draft anterior se puede ver cómo están jugando, empezando a jugar mucho más agresivo. Tenía un Venomancer, creo, un Lone Druid, un Leshrac y no me acuerdo qué otro héroe, pero pusheaba. Tenían los dos teams bastante buen potencial de pusheo.
Tournament. 14 out of the 16 teams were picked by Valve, and the remaining 2 spots were given out via 2
Ahí
geographic
está,
qualifying
Enchantress.
tournaments that 2 were invite only. The
Sí, un
structure of the
Xiao
tournament
Shaman
was
también.
also adjusted to have best of 2 groups and more best of
Cluster.
3 main event matches. Valve were experimenting with how to run an international. Still, the lower bracket remained a bloodbath of best of 1s. Within this bloodbath found itself a field of fierce competitors. Unlike the previous year, now everybody had taken the international seriously, practiced for it, and was here to win. Leading all of them were the Chinese teams, who were widely considered the best and favorites to take the tournament. IG and LGD in particular were looking incredibly strong, coming out of the group stages with only a single loss amongst them. Right behind them was the third Chinese powerhouse, Team DK. On the other hand, the previous champions Na'Vi were struggling, only barely making it to the winner's side of the main event. But they were already grizzled veterans and didn't seem particularly worried.
The International 1 was much more like a dream come true. The International 2 is a dream for somebody else to come true. We are just here to break them.
TI2 was played at a much higher skill level than TI1.
Y sí, porque había más tiempo para practicar.
As far as I'm concerned, TI1 was a prototype, and TI2 was when competitive Dota 2 truly began.
No, las bolas ahí. O sea, ya había escenario competitivo, un escenario competitivo bastante grande. Yo veía replays profesionales en ese momento desde 2008 hasta 2012, vi replays de Dota 1. Las bolas, o sea, había un escenario competitivo muy grande. El tema es el escenario competitivo de Dota 2. Ahí sí te lo concedo porque, a ver, para el TI1 los equipos tenían que practicar con una semana de anticipación. Ya para el TI2 los equipos habían tenido más de un año para practicar y el juego ya había sido refinado un montón de veces. Como yo decía, se aplicaban bug fixes una vez cada 3 días, 100 bug fixes, para que se den una idea del estado en el que tenía el juego. Después de 300 días ya había bastantes, había, qué sé yo, 10.000 bug fixes, entonces ya era un poco más jugable el juego, pero bueno, nada, eso quería agregar.
Unfortunately, the game wasn't very well balanced. Valve's priority had been to add as many heroes as
Claro.
quickly as possible.
No había
And while they
balance porque no
certainly
estaban todos los
tried
héroes.
to balance the game, they didn't do a great job of it. The International 2 was arguably the least balanced of the entire series. 8 different heroes
Nah,
each
no.
had over a 90% contest rate, and out of the 90 hero cast, 57 were contest.
Creo que se fijen que todos los héroes que están ahí son para pushear o teamfightear. O sea, básicamente está el Native Prophet, el Chen, el Shrug, la Naga, el Lycan. O sea, son todos para pushear. Y después está el Ruby, que bueno, es muy versátil. Pero el Invoker y el, y el Darkseer no sé qué hacen ahí, pero bueno, nada. Solo quería mencionar
In
eso.
less than 10% of games,
Son todos
with
pushers.
24 going entirely unpicked and unbanned. A handful of heroes were just so much more powerful than everybody else that they completely determined how the game was played. Rubik was the most contested and successful hero of the tournament because he copied the spells of other overpowered characters. If the most contested hero of a tournament is a copy character, well, then that's a sign of an unbalanced meta.
Nah.
Leading all those broken heroes in raw power was he who pushed and ended games before they even started.
Ahí está.
Lycan. Lycan was a summon-based brawler that became powerful incredibly quickly and could leverage his power into fast tower pushes,
Además la ulti
which
era
then allowed
muy,
his team
muy
to build
fruta.
momentum to either play for strong map control or just end the game right there. At the time, towers were worth a huge amount of gold, far more than any creeps on the map. This paved way to an all-in strategy that used tower bounties as its primary resource and willingly conceded creep farm on the map in favor of pushing. These teams often didn't have a late game plan and instead aimed to win before 30 minutes passed, as otherwise they would fall behind when their opponents caught up on tower kills. It wasn't unusual for these teams to earn a victory at 20 minutes or even earlier. Lycan spearheaded this style of aggressive pushing Dota. At least in theory. In practice, Lycan was banned most of the time, and Nature's Prophet took over his role. 4 out of the top 8 heroes were great at facilitating deadly pushes.
Acá empezaron a hacer Rat Dota. Y el Lycan tenía eso, que se podía escapar rapidísimo.
While you wouldn't see
Hijo
this
de
kind of
puta.
strategy in every game, the entire tournament still warped itself around it. The threat of any team trying to end the match that early forced everybody to play faster than they might have otherwise wanted to. Even setting that aside, Dota was much faster than during the previous year, as teams had gotten better at optimizing their farm, picking effective drafts, and using openings when they presented themselves. Tri-lanes were still the most popular approach, but a variety of different lane compositions were tried by many teams, and even tri-lanes played more aggressively than before, often going for early tower pushes to help gather some resources for their supports. Those additional resources also made mana less of an issue, which is only worth noting because of how much of a
Tampoco.
problem mana was at TI1. While the heroes weren't
El tema es que las
well-balanced,
Clarity se
the
bufiaron
overall
de, 100
meta of
de dar
TI2
100
was
maná a
really fun and
150, creo.
exciting,
Si no estoy
as a broad
equivocado.
range of fundamentally different ideas were clashing against each other. Every team was playing towards different goals with different limitations that they had to adhere to. This exciting meta was only made more exhilarating by the thrilling development of the bracket. In the upper bracket semifinals, Navi managed
Ah,
to knock
esta.
IG into the lower bracket, and then they did the
La
same
ulti
to
es
LGD in the upper
conocida.
bracket finals. The top 4 of the tournament were IG, LGD, Team DK, and Navi. Navi were the West's sole representatives, standing with their unpredictable and aggressive gameplay against the strongest Chinese teams and their impeccable discipline and pursuit of perfection. The grand finals were Navi versus IG, a difficult match for both teams, but IG ended up taking it, becoming the second champions of the International. It was a wonderful
Tengo esta partida casteada, me acuerdo de esta escena perfectamente. Obviamente la casteé la partida. Así que si la buscan en mi canal la tienen para saber mi opinión sobre la partida entera.
an exciting tournament
Nah.
that also showed just how much of a passion project Dota seemed to be for Valve. Gabe
Muy bien,
himself
Baku.
handed IG their edges. For what it's worth, I really enjoyed TI2, and I very much recommend the entire tournament for a rewatch. But to be more specific, Orange vs eHome in the lower bracket round 3, and Na'Vi vs IG Game 2 of the Grand Finals are wonderful and showcase the spectrum of strategies that existed. Over the next year, Valve continued to focus on implementing new heroes at a rate of about 1 per month. There were also various well-deserved balance adjustments. Importantly among those, both Lycan and Nature's Prophet received significant nerfs, which moved the game away from those heavy pushing strategies. Also, on the 9th of July 2013, Dota 2 was officially released. Interestingly, it never went into an open beta, instead sticking with its community-centered key sharing approach all the way. Dota 2 received overwhelmingly positive reviews, although often accompanied with the caveat that the best way to play it was with a group of friends. Luckily, at the time that was quite achievable. Dota 2 was blowing up in popularity, adding 100,000 concurrent players to its player count every single month. By the time of the international free, Dota 2 averaged over 500,000 concurrent players and showed no signs of slowing down.
Más o menos lo mismo que tenemos ahora, o sea, no.
TI3 followed the same tournament format as before, however Valve made one important change to its price structure. In May of that year, Valve released the International 2013 Interactive Compendium.
Todavía lo
Players
tengo.
could purchase the compendium in the Dota 2 store for $10. It included a variety of prediction games for the international free, and owners of the compendium immediately received some cosmetics, but could also get random drops while spectating TI3 matches. However, its most interesting feature was that the compendium functioned as a fundraiser for the international free prize pool.
Sí. Recaudaba plata para el
25% of all
torneo.
sales were added to the 1.6 million that Valve put up themselves. They even included stretch goals to incentivize more players to purchase the compendium.
Que se fue a la
The
mierda el
final
precio.
stretch goal was that
El
the
precio,
community would have been able
la
to
cantidad de
vote on the
gente.
next hero to be added to Dota 2. Unfortunately, this goal was never reached. I would have really liked to see who the community would have chosen. Nonetheless, the compendium managed to increase the prize pool to nearly $2.9 million.
Es un montón.
Competing for this prize were yet again a set of invitees chosen by Valve. Amongst those were a couple of clear favorites. The Chinese teams were still looking incredibly powerful, and nobody in their right mind would be foolish enough to write off Na'Vi, since they managed to reach the finals for 2 years in a row. But the team that was by far the most intimidating was Alliance. Alliance were still a rather new team, having only found each other and their sponsor earlier this year. But it took no time for them to take over the scene, dominating the spring season. Then at TI3, Alliance went 14-0 during the group stage. They crushed their competition with a unique playstyle that focused on farming and defense. Alliance's signature heroes were Io, Nature's Prophet, and Lone Druid, all of which offered a global presence and allowed them to always fight with a numbers advantage. They stifled any early pushing and ganking attempts, then built a strong economy until they were far ahead, and finally finished the game in one overwhelming push. Most teams played momentum-based Dota, and Alliance was all about interrupting any plays that allowed momentum to be built. This completely shifted the metagame of the tournament, as teams both imitated and adapted to Alliance. Dota became slow and defensive. Building momentum wasn't worth it if all it did was create openings. And so, most teams focused on farming patiently to get their late-game carries online. The International 2013 was one of the 2 tournaments who featured a hero with a 100% contest rate. In this case, that was Batrider. Batrider was a
sí.
more supportive character,
Cancerígeno.
although he was usually played in the solo offlane. What made him uniquely valuable was his ultimate.
Dije Io porque se juega con Tiny, Chaos Knight, se juega con básicamente cualquier personaje, o sea, cualquier carry que pudiera gankear y necesitara maná. O sea, porque Io te da era una batería de maná y attack speed, entonces funcionaba muy bien con el Chaos Knight, que básicamente llegaba, te tiraba el stun, te mataba y volvía a la lane a farmear. El Tiny lo mismo, o sea, jugaba como carry obviamente. Le daba un montón de attack speed que el Tiny no necesitaba. Entonces, bueno, nada, ese tipo de cosas era algo que se veía mucho, un dual mid, ¿no? En esta época.
Flaming Lasso. Flaming Lasso allowed Batrider to literally grab an opponent and
No,
then drag
era,
them behind
era
himself.
asquerosísimo. Eso y triple force staff. O sea, imagínense, era imposible pushear contra Batrider. ¿No? Porque te agarraba uno y te lo metía de Tiger 3 a Tiger 1. Digo, de Tiger 1 a Tiger 3. No, era imposible. Te metía, estabas pusheando los Raxes y te metía hasta la fuente. Era
With a
una
blink dagger
asquerosidad.
and a force staff, he could appear out of nowhere
Eso.
and literally kidnap the opposing carry. Batrider, being the #1 hero of the tournament, was a
Bien ahí.
clear indicator of the state of the meta. It was all about carries, it was all about
No,
lane
era que
game,
Batrider estaba
which was
rotísimo.
another thing that Alliance excelled at. They loved playing long matches, as they usually picked greedy heroes that could scale well, and they were one of the first teams to draft offlaners as cores instead of supports. Alliance made it to the grand finals without much struggle, only losing a single game along the way. In the meantime, Na'Vi had been having a rough tournament. Their first upper bracket match was against Orange Esports, a Malaysian team led by veteran player Mushi, but mostly consisting of tournament grinders that had only recently made their debut in the Tier 1 scene. Orange Esports was notorious for being an inconsistent team that put up widely varying results. To many, it was a surprise to see them make it into the upper bracket at all. It was an even bigger surprise when they beat Na'Vi in their first game. But it seemed like that was the wake-up call that Na'Vi needed. They hadn't been performing up to expectations, but after that first loss, Na'Vi stomped Orange and moved on to fight Tongfu. Tongfu was one of those infamous Chinese powerhouse teams, which showed as they brought Na'Vi to the brink of dropping into the lower bracket. In Game 3 of their series, Tongfu were in a dominant position, seemingly only moments away from a victory. But Na'Vi, in a stroke of mad genius, tried something never done before at a TI.
And now, charging back out, Dindy gonna be spotted, and he doomed the chair, and that's a much better choice. Oh, he got him! He got him! Not gonna follow it all the way, because we got a battle to watch with Puppy. Trying to get away from it, gonna be telekinesed back. And they will be able to get him as well. There you so a 1-for-1 trade. And wow, Hal is still alive down there. Finally, managing to bring him down. So that
Fountain Hook,
ages.
eso existe hace millones de años, ¿eh? Existió.
Using a
Hasta que lo
strategy
sacaron.
that was widely considered to be a meme, Na'Vi managed
Era
to
un
stomp
meme.
their way to a historic victory, making it to the upper bracket finals, where they were
A ver, voy a explicar qué se necesitaba para hacer un Fountain Hook. El Chente tenía que tener una habilidad que tenía 6 segundos de delay. O sea, los enemigos te veían con eso, se tiraban para atrás, ya peleaban con uno menos. O sea, peleaban 4 o 5, pues el pulse ibas a tener que estar en base. Segundo, tenía que meter un gancho, ¿no? No había Blink Dagger ni nada por el estilo, así que la Blink Dagger se agregó al push después de que le sacaron el Fountain Hook. O sea, básicamente tenías que acercarte, tirar un gancho con un timing perfecto, porque, a ver, sí, tenías un segundo, no es tan difícil, pero tenés que pegarle a alguien en ese time frame de un segundo cuando el enemigo ya sabe que lo vas a hacer sin tener ningún tipo de tool de movilidad. Es como acercarse caminando con Tide Hunter y tirar la R, ¿viste? Es obvio que la gente va a correr para atrás o te va a tirar BKB en la cara o lo que sea. O sea, agarrar a alguien así era un milagro y bueno, es a lo que jugaron, ¿no? A cometer el milagro. Además, fíjense que la gente siempre habla del combo de Chen y Page, que básicamente es meter a alguien en la fuente, pero nunca hablaron del combo Keeper of the Light o Aio y Page, que funcionaba exactamente igual. El tema es que el Chen estaba súper en meta, el Push estaba súper en meta, entonces como esos dos héroes estaban súper en meta, es obviamente que el combito este iba a saltar en algún lado. Pero fíjense que nunca lo hicieron con Aio o con Keeper of the Light, porque no estaban tan en meta.
promptly schooled by
Eso sí.
Alliance. They dropped into the lower bracket, ready to fight whichever Chinese monster had prevailed. Tongfu, IG, and Team DK were all competing in a ruthless lower bracket. But in a twist of fate, none of them succeeded. After their early loss, Orange Esports have been fighting their way through the lower bracket, beating Team Dignitas, Fnatic, Team DK, and Tong Fu on their way back to Na'Vi. Their incredible run continued as they beat Na'Vi in Game 1 of the lower bracket finals. Game 2 was won by Na'Vi, but Orange then started overwhelming them in Game 3. They were so close to pulling off a miracle. But then, Na'Vi channeled some sort of divine energy, as their grand finals against Alliance was not to be taken. At 35 minutes, Orange killed Roshan, and then accidentally
No. A ver.
denied the Aegis.
Ah, ok.
We didn't
Okay.
realize at first.
Esto no lo
If I remember
sabía.
correctly, we were still playing the game for like 5 minutes. And like the pressure was getting to us too, and like a lot of like stuff's going on. At some point, I think it was Dandy, or maybe Hawas. It's like, oh, they don't have the Aegis. Like,
I think it took a few seconds for like the casters to realize as well, if I remember correctly. Like the crowd as well. Everybody was like, a few moments later, were like, oh.
That doesn't happen. I mean, who does that, and why didn't he pick the Aegis? You have so many questions always on this that, I mean, you kind of ruined the game. It's the feeling that you're left with.
There's footage of KYXY at that moment as his heart literally shatters.
Заденайла!
A ver.
ВР заденайла!
ВРка заденайла Аегис. Кто у нас там? Blood Angel?
Orange were still in a dominant position, but the magic was gone. And Na'Vi were the kind of team to relish this kind of situation. Using two of their signature heroes, Puck and Lifestealer, Na'Vi pushed their way to both an exhilarating and heartbreaking victory. While Batrider was the most contested hero of TI3, Lifestealer was right behind him and was the actual top performer. His incredible tenacity and ability to fight early, while also scaling powerfully into the late
La
game,
beca de
made
gratis,
him a
eso
safe
no lo
pick
menciona por
who
ahora.
always performed well. Na'Vi's Lifestealer was so intimidating that Alliance banned him for all 5 of their grand finals games against
Una
Na'Vi.
beca de gratis. Eso es
This
uno de los
grand
mejores skills del
final
juego.
is, in my opinion, the greatest grand final in Dota history. Many expected it to be a stomp, with Alliance overwhelming Na'Vi in the same way they had during their previous match. And the first game very much went like that, with Na'Vi trying a hyper-aggressive ganking strat and getting shut out by
Ahí
Alliance's
ve
defense.
Girocopter.
But then,
Girocopter.
in Game 2, Na'Vi paced themselves slightly and managed to overwhelm Alliance. From then, it was a back-and-forth series, culminating in a wonderful Game 5 that is best enjoyed in its entirety. Alliance ended up taking the victory in a way
No me digas que esta es la partida en la cual la Templar Assassin tira. A ver, vamos a ver.
that only they could have.
Sí, no, es esta. Esta es la heroica del Puck que empieza a cancelar los TPs. Ahí cancela el TP del Hiram. Y Dandy no tenía. Tenía la Aegis, pero no tenía TP. Creo que tenía la Aegis. Miren cómo están volviendo a la base. Hay de Chaos Knight, que creo que hablaba antes. Le está pegando.
The International 3 is probably the single most legendary Dota tournament of all time, and rightfully so. Orange's unbelievable run through the lower bracket Navi's fountain hooks against Tongfu, and Alliance's outrageous victory made for a perfect storm of narratives. But for what it's worth, I wouldn't recommend rewatching the rest of TI3, as the defensive, farming-centric nature of the meta makes for an unexciting viewing experience. 2 months later, patch 6.79 was released. 6.79 brought an important balance change, which slightly increased the value of tower bounties and slightly decreased the experience bounties of jungle creeps. It also marked the starting point from which Dota 2 was granted development priority over Dota All-Stars. Up to this point, Dota All-Stars would get patched first, and then Dota 2 would port over those changes. 6.79 was the first patch that was implemented directly into Dota 2, which was an exciting moment, because the whole point of Dota 2 had been to no longer be restricted by the Warcraft 3 engine. While this would still take a while to truly manifest, permission had now been granted, so to speak. In May of 2014, Valve released the International Compendium 2014. This compendium worked similarly to the one from before, offering some cosmetic rewards and access to various prediction games for purchasing it. Valve also continued to share 25% of their sales with the TI prize pool and offered various stretch goals. During the previous year, stretch goals had been a little bit awkward, because any given player couldn't contribute more than just the initial $10. The previous compendium limited spending, as players could only buy a single one for purpose. And so, the 2014 compendium fixed this by introducing compendium levels. Players could now earn and purchase additional levels for their compendium, which would reward them with a variety of different cosmetics. This started a craze in the community, with players competing over who could level up their compendium the most. And as a result, TI4's prize pool ballooned from Valve's initial 1.6 million to a total of nearly $11 million. The compendium continued evolving from here, sticking to this basic formula but continuously adding more and more rewards into it. It would also eventually become Dota 2's main source of monetization. Also, along the way, Lycan was buffed. Oh no! The International 4 was the first international to be held at the Key Arena in Seattle, which would become its home location. The Key Arena was quite large, with a seating capacity of over 17,000, which was appropriate now as Dota 2 kept increasing in popularity, regularly breaking 800,000 concurrent players. TI4 was still an invite-only tournament, but it opened up its doors much more than before. Only 11 teams were invited directly to the tournament. The remaining spots were given out to 5 out of 40 teams invite-only regional qualifier tournaments. One spot was given to each of the winners of those regional qualifiers, and the final one to the winner of the newly added Phase 1 of the International 4. This year's International featured a new tournament system that saw it split into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 was a mini-bracket composed of the runner-up teams from the 4 regional qualifiers. The winner from Phase 1 joined the other 15 teams for Phase 2. Phase 2 was a massive round-robin, where every team played every other team in a best-of-1. The top 2 performing teams from this round-robin immediately qualified for the main event upper bracket, while the bottom 6 teams were knocked out of the competition. The remaining 8 teams were then placed in Phase 3, a mini-bracket of sorts that first eliminated 2 more teams and allocated the rest into the upper and lower bracket of the main event. Finally, Phase 4 was the main event bracket, where the remaining 8 teams competed for victory. If this seemed like a bit much, then yes, that's how everybody felt at the time, as this system was quite confusing and wouldn't be used again. Phase 2, the large round robin, was dominated by VG Gaming. This was a huge surprise, as VG Gaming didn't have an outstanding season before TI4. They usually placed in the 3rd to 5th range at Tier 1 tournaments and didn't win a single one of the competitions they participated in. VG were a strong team, but they also couldn't reasonably be considered favorites to win. Day 1 of Phase 2 went by without surprises, with VG winning 3 out of their 4 games, beating teams that they were expected to beat. Day 2 started with VG going up against LGD, a famous and well-respected team from their own region. LGD had already proven themselves, as they made their way to TI4 by winning their regional qualifier tournament. VG then proceeded to absolutely destroy LGD in only 17 minutes. This was highly unusual, but there were a lot of games going on and stranger things had happened before. VG then played 2 more regular games until their match against Newbie, which also ended in 17 minutes. This match was likely the single most fateful encounter in Dota history. On day 3, VG's game against Team DK lasted only 18 minutes. Then they lost the match against EG in 36 minutes, but won 2 more against Alliance in 14 and Team Liquid in 16 minutes each. Their final game of day 3 was against Cloud9, which they also tried to close out quickly, but Cloud9 managed to hold on and earned a 59-minute victory. VG Gaming were changing their playstyle as the tournament progressed, becoming increasingly more aggressive and centered around pushing. They took 2 more victories on day 4, securing their spot in the upper bracket of the TI4 main event. Let's wind back time for a moment to the beginning of Phase 2. Newbie, who, like VG Gaming, had been a lower-end Tier 1 team before this tournament, were performing okay. They liked playing aggressively but would often stumble before being able to close out their matches. Going into their game against VG Gaming, they stood at 4-4, and afterwards they were down 4-5. But after this match, an interesting shift happened. Newbie's next 3 games were all quick victories that lasted less than 30 minutes. Then they stumbled a bit, losing 3 more matches to close out Phase 2. Adapting their strategy like this gave them some good wins, but wasn't enough for Newbie to qualify for Phase 3. They had to play a 3-way tiebreaker with LGD Gaming and Mouse Sports first. If Newbie lost here, that would have been the end of it. They stuck to their new approach and continued playing quicker and quicker. They won the tiebreakers, but that only put them at the bottom of the bracket, meaning that in Phase 3, they had to win an elimination best-of-3 series to stay in the tournament and then 2 more to get to the upper bracket. Phase 3 was difficult for Newbie. They came to the brink of losing twice. But in this struggle, they refined their style, leaning heavily on powerful team-fighting ultimates to support aggressive pushing. After having played 10 additional games over VG Gaming, Newbie met them again in round 1 of the upper bracket and promptly destroyed them in only 14 minutes. Their next 2 games were also thoroughly defined by incredible aggression from both sides, but as they were more even, they took a bit longer to complete. In an incredible upset, Newbie ended up winning the series, then beat Evil Geniuses next and waited for their challengers in the grand finals. What made VG Gaming and then Newbie so different from everybody else was a unique, hyper-aggressive approach to pushing. Pushing strategies as a whole weren't unusual at the time. Lycan had returned to his
Yo tengo video de estrategia de pusheo de 2008.
full spot of utter dominance, closing out the tournament being
Estamos en
contested in
2013 ahora.
98% of games with a 70% win rate. However, usually pushing strategies would play out like this. A team would push a tower and then retreat to heal up and farm for a moment to finish a few items.
No.
They would then push the next tower before retreating again. This was repeated at a rather frequent pace, which allowed the pushing team to build an incremental gold advantage in a
No, de hecho se podía pushear desde nivel 1 con todos los héroes nivel 1 y que uno farmee en la side lane y tener que defender 4 versus 5. Y la idea es que ganabas si no te tiraban los raxes, las barracas. Así que no esto de tirar una torre y volver a curar no era tan así. O sea, depende mucho del strat.
map pressure, limiting the farm of opposing carries. Eventually,
Es una
usually
estrategia
at
normal,
around
no es una
25
estrategia de
to 30
pusheo.
minutes, the pushing team would take barracks, which then resulted in a massive lane advantage that put a serious clock on the defending team.
Eso no es una estrategia de
VG
pusheo.
Gaming, however, played their pushing strategy without the breaks.
Eso es
Instead
una
of
estrategia de
retreating
pusheo.
after a tower was broken, they would immediately rotate into the next lane and continue their assault. This was possible because they drafted resilient teams that relied on summons to sustain their health pool, and they prioritized cheaper.
Yo tengo un video que se llama Estrategia de Dota Extrañas, el push.
When
Que
their
habla justamente de
opponents
esto.
wanted to finish up laning at 12 to 15 minutes, VG were already knocking down their barracks. VG simply refused to let the other team play Dota. Newbie played similarly, but adapted the concept by centering it around big ultimates. Whenever these ultimates were available, they would break a building. If they went uncontested, they would continue pushing afterwards, and if that resulted in a fight, they would use their ultimates to overwhelm their opponents and then take a short break while waiting for their cooldowns. This approach wasn't quite as aggressive as VG's, but still much faster paced than what the other teams were used to. After their loss to Newbie, VG Gaming unexpectedly found themselves in the lower bracket. This was terrible news for everybody else down there. Cloud9 were the first to fall, then Team DK found themselves overwhelmed, and finally, Evil Geniuses were knocked out with Game 1 and 3 lasting 16 and 15 minutes respectively. It was very clear that no other team stood the mildest chance against the hyper-aggression discovered by these two Chinese masterminds. Then, the finals began, and Vici brute-forced a 24-minute victory in Game 1. However, as overwhelming as it was, their style wasn't unbeatable. The best reaction to it was similar aggression, pushing the other lanes while Vici were grouped up and challenging them to fights whenever possible. In other words, Newbie's approach. The next 3 games were a brutal slaughter, with Newbie taking home the victory. All Grand Final games combined lasted a total of 83 minutes and 43 seconds, and this wasn't because of early concessions. When this approach to Dota fought itself, the games were just over that quickly, because neither team had the time needed to prepare a plan B. In Game 4, Vici tried to push for 15 minutes, and when that didn't work, they knew that there was no way to recover as they hadn't been found.
Esto es exactamente lo que estoy diciendo. A ver, Venomancer, Nature's Prophet, del otro lado, ¿cómo se llama? Shadow Shaman, ya sabe que se viene una estrategia bastante picante. Shadow Shaman tira ulti y básicamente es una torre cada vez que tira ulti.
Within the context of this rivalry, TI4 was an
Y
incredible
el Nature's Prophet que inventó el Rat Dota,
but
básicamente.
that narrative was drowned out by a wave of vitriol. The community at large hated TI4, and especially the Grand Finals. They dubbed it Death Ball Meta and declared it the worst international. Personally, I disagree with this. While quite a few TI4 games were short, there was a lot happening within that short time frame. And not every Death Ball game was over that quickly. Many of them were quite exciting back and forth matches in which every tiny moment was crucially important. I think time has judged the International 4 too harshly, and if you're so inclined, I would recommend rewatching the main bracket. It's rather short anyways. Specifically though, I would recommend rewatching the lower bracket finals between Evil Geniuses and VG
El DK que prendía fuego las torres, o sea, con el Corrosive Breath,
what could be done against them,
prendía
which
fuego
made it a
las
quite exciting
derretía.
series. It's an interesting and fun experience from a very different era of Dota. An era of Dota that we left behind.
Sí.
In September 2014, patch 6.82 was released.
6.82
fundamentally reworked how Dota's economy was structured. Towers had their bounties significantly reduced, while hero bounties were buffed to now be much higher and scale more aggressively throughout the game.
Sí.
This scaling included a comeback mechanic that allowed teams to recover if they managed to get a kill while they were far behind. Before 6.82, turning a losing game around was incredibly difficult, often simply impossible. Even a kill on the most farmed enemy carry only netted a small bit more gold than a kill on anybody else. However, after the comeback mechanics were implemented, such a kill could make a huge impact and
Sí, me acuerdo de los jugadores profesionales hablando de esto.
entire game around. One of the many reasons why pushing was so strong as a strategy was that losing a couple of heroes while taking enemy towers wasn't a big problem. But now that attitude had to change drastically, as such losses would completely invalidate the gold earned from the tower kill. 6.82 also introduced bounty runes, which spawned wherever the regular rune didn't and provided the hero that picked it up with a nice bit of gold and experience. This was particularly impactful for supports, who wouldn't normally have the time or opportunity to farm creeps. But picking up a bounty rune was quick and didn't obstruct anybody else. Supports wouldn't always get the chance to pick up bounty runes, as the mids might want it for...
Los mids, esto cambió, o sea, se hizo específicamente por los mids, no por los supports. Los supports me chupan la pija. O sea, esto se hizo para que el mid pueda agarrar con botella la runa y recargarla. Pues nerfearon al courier, creo. O sea, hicieron que el courier, el bot del courier, no sea posible. Entonces tuvieron que agregar la bounty rune para que la mid lane siga teniendo relevancia.
But when they did, they benefited greatly. I consider 6.82 to be the single most important patch in Dota 2's history, and to be the end point of the first era of Dota 2. Before this patch, Dota 2's primary concern was porting over Dota All-Stars from Warcraft 3. The game received regular balance patches, but that was it. There were no big mechanical reworks or new additions that weren't just ports of existing elements. 6.82 was the first patch that fundamentally changed the game, removing the most impactful strategy from the previous 4 years and pushing Dota into an entirely new direction.
Yo seguía jugando acá,
that still defines Dota to this very day. I could envision a world where 6.82 had moved Dota a different way, maybe embracing hyper-aggressive pushing instead of removing it. If that had happened, the Dota of today would be unrecognizable. I understand that this is mostly empty conjecture, but I'm just trying to communicate how important 6.82 was. Valve has released many huge patches over the years, but none of them changed Dota in the same way that 6.82 did, because 6.82 reworked the very core of the game, and everything that came afterwards was built upon that new foundation. The first version of this new Dota was, to be frank, a mess. The comeback mechanics were way overtuned, resulting in a short-lived meta where pub teams drafted exclusively late-game heroes and then played for a lucky kill, which would get them all the farm they needed. This was adjusted across the next couple of minor patches. Then, in April, 6.84 was released. Like 6.82, 6.84 was a historic patch because it was the first that introduced a large number of new items to Dota 2. If you're old like me, then this is the batch of items that will forever be stuck in your brain as new items, even though it's been nearly a decade since they were added. This first set of items was quite interesting, because they broke many of the existing expectations for what items should be. For example, late-game items were generally reserved for attack-based carries, with only a few minor exceptions. But 6.82 introduced Guardian Grease, Lotus Orb, Octarine Core, and Solar Crest, all of which were quite expensive, but didn't have much purpose for attack-based heroes. Much the opposite, as they benefited supports and casters. Supports in particular also received Glimmer Cape, and Observer and Sentry Wards now occupied the same inventory spot. The message was clear. Valve wanted to lessen the cruel burden placed upon supports. Before this point, supports would sacrifice everything they had to enable their carries. It wasn't unusual for them to end the game with literally just brown boots as their only item. But there was definitely a lot of skill involved to navigating late-game fights with such a limited inventory. Many players simply didn't enjoy how any small misstep resulted in their immediate death. In 6.82, supports received money, and in 6.84, items worth buying.
Bueno, acá más o menos yo dejé de jugar, pero no recibieron money un carajo. De hecho, hubo una meta en la cual estuvo la Crystal Maiden con Midas, que después se terminó nerfeando. O sea, no es que no hubo intentos de tratar de mejorar la economía de los supports, pero las Bounty Runes justamente no, eran para rellenar la botella del mid. Pero bueno, básicamente. Voy a seguir después, más tarde, porque si no el video se hace larguísimo y no quiero que saturarlos a ustedes con un video de 4 horas. Este video dura más de 3 horas, Así que, bueno, después si les interesa lo puedo seguir y si no, lo cortamos acá. Bueno, pueden ver ahí 51 minutos de 3 horas. Me interesa más las partes de adelante del video, que es básicamente lo que no jugué y donde no voy a estar haciendo interrupciones. Y que me den comentarios ustedes de cómo lo ven, el, de cómo ven la opinión de esta persona, ¿no? Porque yo puedo opinar de lo old school, pero no de lo más nuevito, ¿no? Digamos, de 2018 en adelante no puedo opinar más. Así que bueno, nos estamos viendo, voy a dejar el video por acá y hasta la próxima.